A permanent display of maritime exhibits from the City Museum and Art Gallery, illustrating 300 years of trade, industry and shipping at the port of Bristol.
But now I am a mariner and plough the angry seas. Oh, I never thought she would be false or ever prove untrue, as we sailed away from Bristol Quay aboard the Kangaroo. I thought I'd like seafaring life, so I bid my love adieu, and sailed away as bosun's mate aboard the Kangaroo. Oh, I never thought she would be false or ever prove untrue, as we sailed away from Bristol Quay aboard the Kangaroo.
Bristol has always been a port, a place with a sheltered harbour where ships could safely unload and store their cargo. The old port in the centre of modern Bristol is now settling into a new role, as houses and recreational facilities are built in place of the wharves and warehouses. Water sports take place where, until only a few years ago, commercial seagoing ships loaded their cargoes. Sand for the building industry is the only commercial traffic requiring seagoing ships now based on the city docks. Visitors to Bristol often say, "Where are the ships?" I thought Bristol was a big seaport. Tell them, as Bristolians say, to look down the mouth, my lover, down the mouth. And indeed, down at the mouth of the River Avon, where it joins the River Severn, about 8 miles west of the modern city centre as the crow flies, that's where you will find one of the largest and busiest ports in Britain. Every year, tons of food for us, food for farm animals, drinks for every day, drinks for special occasions, chemicals, timber, petroleum, coal, metals and their ores pass through Port of Bristol's docks at Avonmouth and Royal Portbury and Portishead. Bristol has had more than its fair share of difficulties, though, over the years, to build and maintain its docks. A trading town was first established in Anglo-Saxon times by the place where the River Avon could be crossed by a ford, and later a simple timber bridge. On this outcrop of red sandstone rock, a castle was built to protect the bridge and the town. It was a safe, natural harbour called simply Brixtol, Bridge Place. In time, the banks of the River Avon and its tributary, the Froom, were built up into proper quays, as Welsh Back, the Grove, and Broad Quay. The River Froom has disappeared from view in the last 100 years in a culvert running underneath Electricity House and the traffic island, in what is still called the Tramways Centre by older Bristolians, who remember this as the place where the main Bristol tram routes converged. Until the middle of the last century, however, a Bristol merchant could step through St. John's Gate straight onto the quayside to watch his ships being loaded with cargo. Low trolleys and sledges pulled by horses over the cobbled quays were used to transfer cargo from ships to warehouses, where it was stored. The Avon and Froom were muddy, dangerous rivers throughout. The tide rose and fell as much as 30 feet twice a day, even in the centre of Bristol, leaving ships stranded on mudbanks and rocks beneath. Bristolians built strong ships to cope with this, and the traditional phrase, "ship shape and Bristol fashion," came about to describe anything well made and perhaps that bit stronger than usual. In the 17th century, Bristol began to establish trade links with new colonies on islands in the West Indies and along the east coast of the North American mainland. Farming plantations, worked by black slaves brought across from West Africa, grew sugarcane, cotton, tobacco and rum. Bristol ships were soon bringing back rich cargoes of these things and valuable tropical items such as logwoods used to make dyes for the woolen cloth trade. Bristol, like other important ports of this time, was inevitably involved in the sad business of the slave trade. But whatever we feel about it now, at the time of the 17th and 18th centuries, when life was hard and cruel for ordinary people anyway, It meant big ships were arriving in Bristol with rich cargoes, and the port became busier than it had ever been. There were problems, though.
Complaints have frequently arisen that ships are burdened by lying aground when the tide is out, have so had their timbers strained that it was found necessary to send them to dock to repair the damages.
By 1750, Bristol was losing trade to other ports like London and Liverpool because they were much cheaper, charging lower dock and harbour dues on most imports. Something had to be done. But the mayor and corporation of Bristol, the merchants represented by the Society of Merchant Venturers, ship owners and everyone else connected with the port, argued for over 50 years about precisely what scheme to adopt to improve the harbour. In 1804, a scheme designed by a famous 18th century docks engineer, William Jessup, was finally adopted, and a dam was built here, turning a 2-mile stretch of the River Avon up to this point at Netham into a non-tidal harbour. Entrance locks were built here at Cumberland Basin for large ships, with entrances for smaller ships at Bathurst Basin and at Totterdown. A 1.5-mile long channel called the New Cut was dug to take the River Avon from Totterdown to the point where the old course of the river had been dammed. The new floating harbour, as it was called, because ships no longer rose and fell with the tide, but stayed practically afloat in the harbour, was opened in 1810, and all seemed better for a few years, until it was realized that the harbour was filling up with raw sewage from the city, and mud was piling up in large banks against the dock walls, preventing ships tying up alongside the quays. Happily, these problems were put right by engineers like James Milne and Isambard Brunel, who's better remembered as the man who designed and had built here in Bristol the world's first practical ocean-going steamship. Brunel's first ship, a paddle steamer called the Great Western, was built on a slipway about 25 feet below where you are now, in William Patterson's shipyard. She was launched in 1837 and for a time ran regular voyages in 12 to 15 days between Bristol and New York in America. Brunel's second ship, the Great Britain, was launched from a dry dock about a quarter of a mile to the west of this museum in 1843. The hull of this ship was rescued from the Falkland Islands in 1970 and is now being restored to show what this magnificent early steamship was like. Sadly, nothing had been done to straighten or widen the River Avon. The Great Britain is still about the biggest ship that can safely navigate the dangerous Horseshoe Bend at Shirehampton, and Bristol could not make proper use after the 1840s of the new, bigger steamships to recapture some of its trade lost to ports like Liverpool and London that were expanding their docks at an enormous rate. In 1850, Bristol desperately needed another new dock altogether at the mouth of the River Avon, while everyone agonized over what to do once again, just to rub it in. Demerara, a brand new paddle steamer by the same man who built Brunel's ships, William Patterson, got stuck in 1851 and was virtually wrecked. Black Eagle blew up beneath the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Kronprinz capsized and blocked the river like the Gypsy, which had to be blown to pieces by Royal Engineers to clear the way. In the end, 2 new docks were built, one at Avonmouth in 1877, the other at Portishead in 1879. Both these docks were run for a time in competition with the city docks, now owned since 1848 by the Bristol Corporation. But this man, Joseph Weston, who was mayor of Bristol in the 1880s, got everyone to bury the hatchet, and the corporation bought Avonmouth and Portishead docks in 1884 and ran them very successfully for many years. For a time, there was a passenger terminal at Avonmouth. Royalty, in the person of King Edward VII, came to open new extensions to the original Avonmouth docks. and exotic tropical fruits like bananas began to pour in through Avonmouth in huge quantities. Avonmouth docks in particular became a major port through which supplies and products of the then huge British Empire came from all over the world. In both the First and the Second World Wars, the port of Bristol was one of the busiest in Britain. But slowly but surely, further changes in the size of ships and the way cargoes were transported to and from the docks, first by rail, then by road, and also packed and stored first in small boxes, sacks or barrels, then in bulk and huge containers moved by lorries, have meant that the port of Bristol was, by the 1960s, in need of yet another new dock. This time a modern container terminal capable of harbouring 70,000-ton ships, 20 times bigger than the SS Great Britain, was built and opened in 1976 by the Queen at Royal Portbury. The row goes on today about the cost of paying for this new dock at Portbury, but 100 years ago, the same argument was going on about Avonmouth and Portishead. 60 years before that, it was the cost of the floating harbour. So, despite the problems of raising the huge sums of money needed to build bigger and better docks, for its part, Bristol has, up till now, always managed to remain shipshape and Bristol fashion and keep in the forefront of the shipping business.
Kitty is my darling. Hole on the bowling, hole.
What do you think the future of the port of Bristol is going to be in the next 20 years? Enjoy the rest of your look around this Maritime Bristol exhibition.
Fine town. Hole on the bowling, hole. Hole on the bowling, this packet is a rolling. Hole on the bowling, hole.